Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode, actually the 32nd episode of the Stellium Astrology Podcast. I'm Stephanie James, the founder of StelliumAstrology.com and also the founder of this podcast and gracious host. I used to write horoscopes for Elle magazine. I have taught classes for the London School of Astrology. I've travelled to India. I'm preparing classes for a course running in China later in the year. So I've done some international astrology speaking and teaching, as well as homegrown. So thanks for joining me at the podcast today. I'm having one of those really productive days, and it feels so good to be so productive. I love being productive. I'm a Capricorn. Capricorns love being productive. If I have a day that's gone by where I haven't been productive, I feel restless and irritable. And I know some people find that if they have to do jobs and be productive, like my boyfriend, for example, if I say to him, "Oh, I've got a great idea for your day off. You can be really productive on your day off." He says, "I don't want to be productive on my day off. I want to be lazy and enjoy the day." He's Taurus rising. So, each to their own. However, for me personally, a productive day is I sleep better at night when I've been busy working hard and getting results for my efforts. And I've had a few client bookings over there. Literally today, I just had a client booking and one yesterday as well. Both lovely, airy ladies with planets in air signs, Gemini and Aquarius. Both of them had Taurus moons. Interestingly, you do see these sort of patterns when you've got clients booking in with you. And even though their consultation charts looked almost exactly the same, because when you book in with somebody, when someone books in with me, I don't just look at the birth chart. I also look at the time they came for the consultation. So one of them came at 3:15 yesterday and one of them came at 3 o'clock today. And they both had a massive stellium of planets in Aquarius in their 7th house. They had some stuff going on in Taurus in their, I think one of them had it in their 9th house and one had it in their 10th house. Usually the consultation chart tells enough of a story that you could do the entire reading based off the consultation chart alone. And it's one of my favourite things to do. So if you are somebody who doesn't really know your birth time, we can do readings based on your consultation chart alone, which is interesting if you don't really know what time you were born. And it's a bit, you lack a bit of clarity. Maybe you're adopted and you don't know the details, or maybe your mum is super forgetful, or maybe she was on a lot of drugs when she gave birth to you. Many reasons why you might not have your birth time, including some people don't even know their birth date. I know I worked with a couple of guys. One guy was from Hong Kong and he just said, I don't have my birth date. And I was like, wow, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine. He knew he was a Sagittarius, but that's all he knew. He didn't know his actual date of birth or year of birth even. So we can do readings based on the consultation chart alone if you don't have that information, though it's obviously more helpful to build a bigger picture if we have the rest of the information. But anyway, I have been getting some lovely feedback for the podcast. I've been getting lots of people booking in with me and it's been really lovely. As previously mentioned in the Jupiter episode, I am thinking about evaluating my pricing system for my patrons. I'm almost certain I'm going to change the prices. So do check in to my Patreon page. Probably in about a week or so. I'm probably going to have altered my tier system. But today we're going to be talking about practical planet Saturn. Saturn is the second of two social planets. I've got my let me just call it up. I've got my little sheet with my info on it, but I also have a few little quotes and things as well. And I think it's interesting that I'm talking about Saturn today and I'm having a super productive day, because Saturn can be a planet of productivity. It can also be a planet where the work is piled on you and it can get incredibly stressful and you can just be it can be like a time where you don't have time for fun when you have a Saturn transit. Interestingly, when I had Saturn approaching my sun, I think Saturn was at 15 degrees Capricorn and my sun's at 17 degrees and 43 minutes of Capricorn. There was an eclipse as well. So there was Saturn and the eclipse happened around that point with Saturn. And that's when I got my horoscope column for Elle magazine, and it was really great. But it was a real education for me, because I had to really get very precise on my writing style, and I had to like edit a lot of what I was saying and make it make sense, and it had to be really succinct. I had 52 words per sign, and you'd think, oh, 52 words, that's not much, but when you try and say something meaningful in 52 words, you find out very quickly that it's very difficult. And so that was a really challenging but rewarding time for me, and really grateful for that opportunity. So the bounty, or should I say really the rewards that you can reap from a Saturn transit, can be definitive. A famous person who's had a Saturn transit, who has had an incredibly definitive time in her career, is Billie Eilish. I think she's had, from about the age of 15, she's had Saturn oppose her natal Saturn, transit her Venus and Jupiter conjunction, go over her midheaven and her Sun, and over her Mercury, and over those years has really had a career-defining impact on the music industry and for herself. So I did write an article about Billie Eilish's stellium, and she's going to have Saturn moving over her Aquarius planets as well. She's also got 3 planets in Aquarius, including her moon and Uranus and Neptune. So that's her second kind of stellium in her chart, which is also going to get hit by Saturn. So there's somebody who may be maturing in front of our eyes, actually, particularly when Saturn gets to her moon. I've noticed she's been doing a lot more risque stuff, including making a video about body positivity and being like owning that body and being proud of who you are, because she's been receiving a lot of hate for the fact that she wore a vest top out in public. I mean, what is wrong with people? Why can't they just let people be? I don't think there was anything wrong with Billie's body. She's womanly, and they just immediately, like, the reason she always wears really baggy clothes and stuff is because she's like, I just don't want people focusing on me in that way. And the vultures just came straight out as soon as that picture was published. It's just horrific to think that somebody of her age as well, she's only, I think, 18, she's so young still, is already receiving that kind of negativity. It's just so not acceptable. Oh, I'll get off my soapbox now. Anyway, Billie's having a Saturn transit that is quite, like I said, definitive, career defining, and quite critical. Could make her quite critical of herself and her public image. It's like having a lot of weight to carry. The weight of the world is on her shoulders at the moment. I'd say she's through kind of the worst of it. And as you can see, the rewards she's reaping from the hard work that she's put in with that Saturn transit is it's defined her for life. And that's the thing, when we do have a Saturn transit to our public place, the midheaven, which is our sort of the public angle where we have our career point, our ambitions, aspirations, who we aspire to, who we look up to. When we have Saturn transiting that point, it's very important to, always work hard and be honest and give 110%, because, it's almost like a kind of a photograph that can never ever disappear. It will be out there forever, and what we're doing in that picture is going to be remembered. So Saturn across the midheaven can be a very a time where we have to make sure that we're remembered for the right reasons. And so Saturn is the seventh planet, the seventh traditional planet. And I think when we use the word planet, we do include Sun and Moon there, even though they are technically the luminaries. But the seventh traditional planet, so Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, that are visible to the naked eye. Now, it would have to be quite a clear night for you to be able to see Saturn with the naked eye, but it is possible. Beyond Saturn, you need a telescope, really, or binoculars. I think probably a telescope to see Uranus, and then Neptune and Pluto further out there. But those are the transpersonal planets, and we'll be talking about them over the coming weeks. But Saturn is considered a social planet. It affects people of the same age group, usually in the same year at school and the years either side. And it's kind of, it represents the opposing instincts. So growth and restriction, or expansion and withdrawal. And it's kind of the principle of yes, Jupiter, and no, Saturn. So when an opportunity presents itself, it's like, you know, you can keep saying yes. Someone that's springing to mind right now, not because I've got her chart in front of me, but I know she's an Aquarius. She had her birthday last week, is Holly Willoughby. In the UK, she presents, I think it's this morning that she presents with Philip Schofield. And she's somebody who has been in the public eye for a long time and is a very well-liked television personality. She's a mum. I think she's got a Taurus moon. Looked at her chart the other day, actually. Yeah, so she's an Aquarius of the Taurus moon. There we go with the synchronicities again. You know, I've had 2 airy clients recently, both with Taurus moons, and now I'm talking about Holly Willoughby. She's going to have Saturn moving through her sun sign and any other planets that she's got there, and squaring anything in in Leo or in Taurus, and opposing anything, in Scorpio or Taurus, and opposing anything in Leo. So, if you've got anything going on in Aquarius or any of the fixed signs, you're probably feeling Saturn right now. But I would say with Holly Willoughby, she just seems to say yes to every opportunity that comes her way. She presents so many different shows. She's a mum, like she's got 3 children. She's got an audio book out, which means, and she recorded that book as well with her own voice. So it's like having the book written, recording it as well in a studio, presenting all these things on TV. I just feel like some people, you just think you are constantly working, like she's a workaholic. So either she may, with Saturn to her sun, have a really career-defining moment over the next couple of years, or she could maybe burn out a little bit, because the problem with Saturn is it puts us under so much pressure that if we're doing too much, it can force us to have a break, because it's kind of like the planet of no. So if we keep saying yes to things, Saturn's going to say no for us. So Saturn is the ruler. Let me get to my Saturn page. Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius. So traditionally, Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, but by modern rulership, it's ruled by Uranus. So we have usually 2 different types of Aquarius. You have the Saturnian Aquarius, or you have the Uranian Aquarius. And as mentioned, Saturn is a social planet. And a great quote for Saturn here that I've got. I can't even pronounce who says it. Thucydides. I really didn't do well in history. As interesting as I find it, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Self-control is the chief element in self-respect, and self-respect is the chief element in courage. Great Saturnian quote, because Saturn is all about self-control and about respect. I think that as a Capricorn, I have to say from personal experience, if I don't respect somebody, I find it kind of hard to like them. And, if I lose respect for somebody, it makes me find them less attractive. So for me as a Capricorn, meeting people who I respect, I find it's an attractive quality. I don't know how other signs feel about that. I can't speak on behalf of other sun signs. However, I know that respect is a huge, huge thing for Capricorns, and they like to be respected just as much as they like to respect other people. And they respect hard work, and they respect people who are focused and driven and very genuine, actually. Because I think with Saturn, there is no pretense. There's no playing. There's no messing around. There's no nonsense with Saturn. And it makes me sound very boring, doesn't it, when I say I'm a Capricorn and, all of these things relate to like Saturn-ruled signs. However, there are other chart aspects, as we've always discussed. I have a Gemini ascendant and I have a 5th house moon. So I'm very playful and I like to have fun and I love nonsense. But I respect that no-nonsense approach, especially the older that I get. I really do. So Saturn really kind of gives us this urge to be safe and to be secure through achieving things that give us tangible results. Or Saturn is the planet of manifestation. So what Saturn touches in your chart It gives it a manifesting ability. Say you had Saturn, Saturn coming to your sun, it helps you to, whatever your kind of direction is in life, where you're supposed to be headed, makes it more tangible for you, makes it much clearer for you. It manifests rewards for hard work you've already put in. It gives you the hard work in order to get the rewards in the future. If it was transiting something like Neptune, for example, a planet with a reputation for, really kind of making things very difficult and unclear, perhaps even, gives us a leans towards, drinking and drugs sometimes, and escapism. Saturn can be a clarifying transit, which helps us sober up, because Saturn is a sobriety planet. So if you were somebody who had for years thought, I really want to stop drinking, I drink too much, and when I drink too much, I lose control. If Saturn was approaching your Neptune, for example, I'd say this is a great opportunity for you to do what you really want to do and kick the booze, because Saturn comes along, it helps you to see more clearly, it helps you to have a bit more structure, it sobers you up enough to realise that actually it may not be the best investment for your time. And again, time, another key word for Saturn. Saturn rules time. In Roman mythology, Saturn is Chronos, old father time, and Chronos is, if you think of the word like chronological order, chronology, it's almost about understanding the order in which you come, where there is this connection with hierarchy with Saturn. Where do you come in that order? Just in contrast to the Aquarian expression of Saturn, I've spoken about Aquarius before, and Aquarius doesn't really do hierarchy, whereas Capricorn does. So Saturn in either of those signs, it's interesting that there is a differentiation between order, in a sense, and whether or not, there has to be a hierarchy, or whether there has to be a kind of equality, or not necessarily equality, but a kind of rule that is fair to all. So that's the difference between Capricorn and Aquarius. There are many differences, but that is just one of them, and probably the main one. The Aquarius is more, I think I said before, that Aquarius is much more of a socialist kind of sign, and Capricorn is much more conservative, traditional. You would say if you were voting in politics, Aquarius is a bit more Labour, a bit more in this country anyway, in the UK, Labour or the Liberal Party, whereas in Capricorn you've got the more traditional Conservative Party. So Saturn is kind of concerned with preserving tradition. It takes about 29.46 year orbit. So around the age of 29, everybody has Saturn return to the position that it was when you were born. Some people have it at 28, but yeah, generally around the age of 29, we have our what is known as Saturn return, which I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably heard that word before, because it's kind of, I kind of call it the coming of age transit. In the same way you can watch that film American Pie, and they're all, trying to, lose their V plate before they go to college and stuff. Saturn is a kind of astrological version of that film, except instead of being something silly like that, it's much more serious stuff. So you would, if you've been a good person and you've listened to your true intuitions and your true callings, and you've followed a path that it resonates with what is truly for you, then a Saturn return can be a moment of crowning glory almost. It can be a time where actually you maybe you get married to the person that you've been with for, if you've been lucky enough to meet somebody who's, got themselves together. It can solidify that connection you have with that person. It could be the promotion that puts you in a position that, you've been working towards for a long time. It could be getting the keys for your house that you've been saving a deposit for. Saturn can be definitive in that respect. However, if you happen to have been working in a job that sucks the life out of you, and you absolutely can't bear to get up in the morning, you hate your life, You don't know why you're doing this job other than the fact that it pays well, or that it makes your mum and dad happy and that they're really proud of you for doing this job because it sounds good on paper, looks good on paper. Or perhaps you've been studying a degree towards something, halfway through you realise it's not really what you want to do. And ultimately, it's kind of, you're really not on the right page in life. That can be Saturn coming along to say, okay, it's time for you to stop doing this now. It's time for you to quit. It's time for you to walk out of that job. I know that's what happened in my Saturn return. I'd been working as a civil servant for many years, and my mum had always said, I hate this job, I don't want to do it anymore. And she'd go, oh no, it's so good, it's a good job, they look after their employees. And my experience of what happened when I was in the civil service was the complete opposite. They do not look after their employees. They might have an investors in people stamp, and it might be a really respectable job on paper, but actually it's not like that when you're inside the job. It wasn't nice. I didn't enjoy it. I had a horrible time. And, I went through an awful lot, and I really just wish I had left when I first wanted to, which was about 3 or 4 years into the job. I ended up staying for 7 years, which is 1/4 of a Saturn cycle. If you think about it like this, that would be the first quarter moon of the Saturn cycle. That I kind of, knew that it wasn't for me really. Basically 7 years, Saturn travels 90 degrees in the chart. So after 7 years, that's when I finally handed in my notice, and I was so pleased to go. But I was scared because I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't know what I was going to do. And it was around the same time, actually, on my Saturn return, people, I joined the London School of Astrology. My first class, the chart for my first class was really interesting. I was having my Saturn return. I was having all these really interesting transits. I met a bunch of people who I have absolutely no doubt I was meant to meet in this lifetime. And I'm still in touch with those people. And it was honestly such a fantastic choice that I made. And, this is the thing that happens with Saturn. I had not really much money, but I had enough money to invest in doing something that I really, really cared about and what I was really interested in. And I just followed my true sort of bliss, really. I followed my bliss. And that's what Saturn asks us to do, actually, to an extent. It doesn't want us to do things. Saturn doesn't ask us to suffer. He might pile the work on, even if we're doing what we love. He might be piling the work on. But it's a planet that tests us and asks us if we're really, really happy and doing what's right for us. If we are and we stick at it, then it'll be fine. But if we aren't, it will soon become very obvious. So if you've got Saturn return stories, I would love to hear your Saturn return stories. Please get in touch with me. It's so fascinating to hear what people went through. And if anybody is interested or struggling with a Saturn return or is curious to know what to expect, a book that I recommend to everybody is called Saturn's Return, Overcoming the Most Tumultuous Time of Your Life. Something like that. And it's by the Saturn sisters. Let me just look it up. Saturn's Return, tumultuous. Those are my keywords that I'm searching for. Here it is. Surviving Saturn's Return, Overcoming the Most Tumultuous Time of Your Life by Shireen Shostak and Stephanie Weiss. Not Stephanie James, not me. I didn't write this book. However, I did meet Shireen in India when I was out there doing my talk on Capricorns, actually. The Capricorns that were born between 1988 up until about 1999. And Shireen is a really fantastic astrologer who writes horoscopes for Elle magazine as well. And I happened to be out there when I had Saturn on my South Node, which is often a time of great karmic connection with other people. So Saturn goes retrograde about 5 months a year. It travels through the Zodiac about 2.5 years per sign. And the glyph for Saturn looks like the letter H with a cross at the top of the the first line of the H going down. So the line from the top to the bottom before you do the flick. And it's said to be Saturn's sickle, which gives it an agricultural connection. So actually Saturn is a planet that's kind of connected to agriculture. And actually, I think I remember I was doing a course called Planetary Magic in Treadwell's bookshop in London, a great bookshop if you happen to be, it's a great esoteric bookshop if you ever happen to be in London, and looking around. There's a couple, there's Watkins, Atlantis bookshop, and also Treadwell's, but I've done a number of courses at Treadwell's, and in this guided meditation I did, I don't know why, but I found myself in a field full of wheat, and I met Odin. I didn't realise it was Odin at the time. It was a hooded figure that almost looked a little bit like you imagine the Grim Reaper, but actually I realised it was Odin, which is the Norse god of Saturn. So that's really interesting that I had that connection before I even knew who Odin really was. In Greek mythology, Saturn is known as Saturnus, and as I previously mentioned in Roman mythology, he's Kronos, and Kronos actually eats his own children, which is interesting because if you think about the planet Saturn, another gas planet, just like Jupiter, but the Saturn is so light that if you could fit Saturn in a lake or a pond on planet Earth, it would float. It's so buoyant, which is interesting considering it is the heaviest planet in the Zodiac as far as astrology is concerned. However, the rings around Saturn are hundreds and thousands and millions and billions of little rocks that have been pulled into Saturn's orbit and are spinning around and are crashing against each other, and some of them are the size of houses and some of them are much bigger. From a distance they make these beautiful rings that make Saturn practically impossible to ignore, so mesmerising, but close up it is like the most, if you ever were in a spaceship and had to go through those rings, it would be like trying to cross the road in Vietnam. I don't know if you've ever seen those people on their mopeds. My mum and dad travelled out there years ago and they sent me a video of like the traffic. There's no traffic light system out there. They were just all driving at a crossroads and avoiding each other, beeping each other, but it was just pure mayhem. But that could be the kind of the symbol of Saturn crushing and devouring his children. The archetype for Saturn is that he is old father time and he's a strict teacher. And he's also one that we fear. So as far as teachers are concerned, we had Jupiter last week, who is a fun teacher who makes learning enjoyable, and you just get this real sense of, with Jupiter you get fulfilled, and it's almost like feeding your soul within, just pure pleasure when you're learning and enjoying, and the transit can be fantastic. Whereas with Saturn, it's just that teacher who, if anybody's seen The Inbetweeners in the UK, The Inbetweeners is a programme about 4 misfit boys who don't really fit in. One of them's a compulsive liar, the other one's completely thick, and then you've got one boy who's a bit of a wet blanket, and he's just totally in love with his next door neighbour or the girl that he's grown up knowing. And then this boy who really has come from a posh school, who his mum and dad got divorced and he's had to go to a state school, so basically he hasn't got a paid education anymore, and he turns up to school on his first day with a briefcase, and everyone calls him briefcase wanker because he sticks out like a sore thumb. But the head teacher is, I can't remember his name in real life, he's a comedian. I'm not really a fan of him actually, I'm not a big fan of him, but he is a great figure to imagine as a Saturnian type of teacher. He's the head teacher, he's not nice, he doesn't do anybody any favours, he doesn't really respect anybody, because as far as he's concerned, nobody's earned his respect. Nobody's earned anything in the way of him being soft on them, and the school, rightly so, seems to be terrified of him. And funny enough, the actor who plays him did actually used to be a teacher as well, so you can imagine he was probably actually quite like that. But yeah, Saturn is he's a tough one to crack, and when you do get the respect from Saturn, once you've had that transit, once it's passed, it does tend to, you do tend to be left with a kind of legacy, but it's all the work that you've done. Saturn brings with it, it's like, okay, it's time to get some work done now. It's time to really focus and get on with things. And it's going to be hard. I'm going to overwhelm you. And you're just going to have to get your head down and do the hard work. And when he's passed and he's gone and that hard work has been done and you can take a break and look at everything that you've managed to create during his period, because again, Saturn, all the planets have their own creative way. And with Saturn, he brings real results. In fact, probably the most results out of any planet in the solar system, astrologically speaking. So it can be a time where once you can take a breather and Saturn's no longer sitting around your sun or whichever planet he happens to be on, you can suddenly look back and go, wow, that was quite an epic period of time in my life. So for me, like I said, like with Elle magazine, and I didn't just write horoscopes for Elle, I was writing for my website and I was writing for another magazine at the time as well. So writing 3 horoscope columns, and I was working full-time hours. And then in the meantime, I was writing blog posts and doing all sorts of other things. So obviously it's the whole reason why I didn't start doing my podcast any sooner. I just didn't have the time. I had no social life at all. Anytime someone said, this is pre-lockdown, by the way, but anytime someone said, do you want to go to the pub? Let's go for a drink. Let's have some fun. I'd be like, I'm sorry, I can't. I've got to work. That was literally all I did. And everyone was like, oh God, it must have been kind of annoying for my boyfriend, but, he had his friends to go out with, so he was okay. But yeah, by the end of it, I just had so much to show for it that I was just like, wow, it was totally worth it. If you can imagine, it's like when you're at school, I think around the age of 15, when you're sort of studying for exams and stuff, and you're at that point where you're like really worried about the future and there's a lot of pressure applied to you at school. In this country, in the UK, at the age of 15, we've got either mock exams or we're preparing for our GCSEs, which are kind of a big deal, and kind of, determine whether or not you're going to be able to get into college to do your A-levels. And that's usually when Saturn is opposite. So that's like the halfway point before you've got your Saturn return. So that kind of pressure, we've all been through that. We can relate to that. If you've had your Saturn return, you can relate to the kind of events that you would have had to go through with your Saturn return. And we have Saturn transits all the time when they move over other planets as well. So it expresses itself in many different ways. It's Saturn. The part of the body that Saturn rules is the skin, the bones, and it also rules aging and degeneration. Now, one teacher that I've had at the London School of Astrology called Richard Swatton, who's fantastic, and I hope to get him on this podcast at some point as an interviewee. He says, without Saturn, we would just be a pile of jelly on the floor because we need our bones and our skeleton in order to stand up. So there are essential roles that Saturn plays with the skin and the bones. We wouldn't really exist without Saturn. But sadly, yes, Saturn rules the aging process. Which is disappointing because we do hit an age where suddenly we notice lines and wrinkles appearing and, you're just not as cute as you used to be. Like when you've got a pet and you look at them and you think, oh, I remember when she was a kitten and look at her now. She's just a matted old little fuzzy... I'm thinking about my mum's cat, Fluffy. She was so cute when she turned up and now she's just like this eccentric ball of fluff that's just getting a bit old and a little bit mental. But, we love her all the same. But, you do with your pets see the ageing process a lot more quickly. And Saturn can introduce us to things like mortality as well. We can understand that nothing lasts forever because Saturn is not infinite. It is finite. Jupiter is a planet that believes in infinity. I think I said last week, Buzz Lightyear says to infinity and beyond, whereas Saturn is kind of a little bit more like, yeah, sorry, but you can't fly. It's almost like Woody and Buzz, and Woody and, Woody being even named after something quite Saturnian and tangible, being wood. He says, no, sorry, you can't fly. You're just falling with style. Sorry to burst your bubble, Buzz Lightyear, but it's true. The key role for Saturn is that it's about limitation, but it also provides us with structure and necessity. And I've mentioned it plenty of times, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that we've had this year, last year, which kind of preceded all of this austerity, which is a key word for when Saturn and Pluto get together, forced us to get back to basics. And, we had to get back to a necessary kind of routine, as opposed to a luxury, embellished routine full of lots of things that we love to do. We just had to do what was absolutely necessary. And in this country, we had key workers going out, but I think, or was it essential? I think in the US they said essential workers, but in the UK we say key workers. Can't remember, it's one way or the other. But either way, we were stripped back to basics, and Saturn can be seen as a kind of back to basics, tightening the purse strings kind of planet. When we've got Saturn working for us in a more experienced way, when we've been working with him for a long time, we can afford to be a bit more extravagant. But Saturn is definitely a planet that's quite prudent and quite, it's not particularly flush with the cash. Usually Saturn will invest in things because of the purpose, serves some kind of purpose. Jupiter would invest because it just loves to splash the cash. I was just kind of thinking about how, just the kind of ruler that Jupiter would be compared to Saturn. It is very much like the Tories. They come into power and they increase taxes, and everybody's having to pay more into the pot. But actually the Tories are in power in this country at the moment, and, they'd been in power for quite a while. So we'd all been paying extra money into taxes and stuff, which I think is probably where they managed to find the £42 billion or however much it was that they pulled out of their pockets to put into the NHS during the pandemic. Whereas another government, I think we had a Labour government back in the days of Tony Blair, which was in the 90s, I think. Tony, I don't know, might not have been as far back as that. Might have been the earlier noughties. And I think when they left Downing Street, the person in charge of the Treasury, can't remember his name, left a note for the Tory government who was coming in to take over, and they said, "Sorry, we've spent all the money," which is kind of like a Saturn Jupiter type of attitude towards running a country. Everybody prefers Jupiter because you get all these lovely benefits, and they invest in things and make it more fun and enjoyable. The Tories, that Saturnian approach is to make cutbacks, tighten the purse strings, raise taxes. But they're almost this seesaw of, how to, you can't just live one way forever. You do have to have that flexibility between sometimes having a bit more and sometimes having a bit less. Here's a good quote. Tough love may be tough love to give, but it is a necessity of life and assurance of positive growth. See, Saturn may not be associated with growth in the same sense that Jupiter is, as in Jupiter can be overblown and it can blow things out of proportion. But actually at the same time, Saturn can force us to grow in different ways by restricting us and helping us to be more resourceful with our areas that we lack things, or, where we're doing so much work, we might learn new coping techniques, new strategies, new ways of structuring ourselves. You can almost think of a time with Saturn weighing on your shoulders could be a time where at university, writing a dissertation or, doing exams at uni. And that's kind of a bit of a coming of age story for a lot of people. So, so that's quite interesting. So at best, really, Saturn, like I said, it's quite prudent, cautious, practical, responsible, holds himself accountable. It was an important lesson for me as a Capricorn to learn that instead of dodging responsibility, putting up my hand and saying, yes, I should have done better and I will next time, it's quite sobering and quite character defining to actually accept your flaws, accept where you didn't quite meet the mark, and to know what you need to do to improve the next time you want to get to that point, or the next time you attack anything in life where you want to get results. Saturn's also very cautious. It's that kind of planning into contingencies and making sure that, there's always a first aid kit when they go camping. I'm making a lot of British references today, but there's another TV show called The Mighty Boosh, and there's a character on there called Howard Moon. I can't remember what his name is in real life. Julian something, can't remember. Who he's fantastic. And there's Vince, and Vince is played by Noel Fielding, and them two together, they're almost like Saturn in Aquarius and Saturn in Capricorn. Vince is like this confusing, non-binary, quite feminine, masculine guy who wears makeup, and he's a bit weird and wacky. Definitely completely chaos humour. It's a very psychedelic TV show. And then you've got Howard Moon, who is this very boring, straight down the line kind of, one of the things he says is it's okay to have fun, but let's make it safe fun. And he has a suit, like an explorer suit, that's got loads of pockets for him to put all his pens in and things like that. And they are so clearly like, it just seems like one of them is definitely, Vince is definitely more of your Aquarian type of Saturn. Or maybe he's just full on Uranus and Aquarius. And then Howard Moon is definitely very Saturn in Capricorn type. So yeah, if you haven't ever seen The Mighty Boosh, it's very weird. It's wacky humour, but if you're kind of into weird, wacky British humour, you might enjoy it. Yeah, very interesting. So, like I said, Saturn can be where we have ambitions, and it's where, when you have a Saturn transit, you often need to establish some kind of boundaries. You definitely have to you do have to learn to say no to things and to people where you might have said yes constantly. It could be a time where we, focus on our careers and looking to the future in a different way than a Jupiter transit. Jupiter transit could be dreaming about the future and seeing the bigger picture, whereas a Saturn transit could be about strategic future moves, a bit more like playing chess. Yes, Saturn's quite a cold planet as well. So you can think about Saturn as contraction. As far as Jupiter's expansion, Saturn can be contraction. And like I said, this with the social planets, it's people who are in the same sort of school year. I'd say with Saturn, they could have Saturn in the same sign as you, or either side, within a certain within a certain amount of degrees. And like I said, Saturn, it takes 2.5 years approximately per zodiac sign. So there will be similarities and themes with things that you have to deal with those people in your age group. Saturn's also a planet of destiny as well. It's kind of connected to karma in a way. Usually when you meet people who have Saturn contact with you, it can be that there's a lot of work that you have to do together. It could be that you've got loose ends you need to tie up together. If anyone's got their Saturn on your sun, or your Saturn is on their sun, there's definitely some sort of past life stuff. And same with the moon, or with Saturn on the ascendant. In your synastry charts, in your relationship charts, there's definitely a kind of a sense of, meant to be, there's stuff to do. And Saturn in relationships can be the glue that holds you together. So Saturn can be a really good, we're talking about Saturn and it sounds like this kind of like, oh gosh, kind of foreboding and not particularly nice transit, but it has its benefits. But actually in relationship astrology, if you see somebody's got Saturn on one part of somebody's chart that's quite poignant, it can actually be a really good sign for a lasting relationship. So, along with being very practical and reliable and resilient as well, and responsible, Saturn's quite serious and self-restricted. It can be a bit self-denying sometimes, it can be like not really wanting to spend money on themselves because, they don't really want to invest in themselves type of thing. And at worst they can be quite fearful, living in fear all the time, making choices out of fear rather than daring. Sometimes Saturnian types can want to stick to what's safe, stick to the comfort zone. So stepping outside the comfort zone can be quite difficult for them. And often, if they are that kind of playing it safe Capricorn, their Saturn transit will force them out of their comfort zone. Can be quite mean, not mean in a nasty way, but yes, also that can be true, but also financially can be quite mean, not really wanting to spend any money on themselves or others. Saturn's limitations really can be so practical that they don't really dare to dream. Just negative and inhibited really. So it can be a difficult planet if it's a very prominent one in your chart. But when you get a good relationship with Saturn, you can get a lot out of it. So let's have a quick look and see who I've got here. One moment. Okay, so I just had a little look because I was a bit, as though I was being productive, but I was also a little bit disorganised and I hadn't prepared a listener. But I've chosen a listener who applied to be on the podcast quite a long time ago, Emily Kay, who a person that I know who applied to be on the podcast. And I thought she'd be a really good one because she actually has got Saturn rising. And actually it's Saturn rising in Virgo, and Virgo is a very work-orientated, focused sign of the Zodiac at the best of time, quite a service-orientated sign. And having Saturn there, I mean, having a Virgo ascendant. I just happened to see a meme the other day, or somebody had mentioned in one of the astrology groups on Facebook, how hard it is to have a Virgo ascendant because they're just so critical of themselves. And I'd never really thought about that before. I'd never thought about what it would be like to have Virgo rising. I do know a few people with Virgo rising who, I guess they are quite critical of themselves actually. What I always admire about Virgo rising is their just ability to just get stuff done. They're very productive. As you know, I admire that. But also they're kind of very got a really good way of sort of seeing things in a very structured way. But yes, Virgo is incredibly critical, self-critical, and critical of others and other things, not just people, but also objects. It's the discerning nature of Virgo. To have Saturn rising in Virgo is to be incredibly critical. I would say usually someone with Saturn rising, they carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. And I have to say with this friend of mine, Emily Kay, who I know I've spoken about her previously. I can't remember which episodes I talked about. It may have been the Capricorn episode because she has a Capricorn Moon as well. And Emily Kay has got, her parents have run a taxi firm, a cab firm. And she has worked she didn't always work for the business, but she did work elsewhere for a little while. She worked for the civil service too, actually. I believe it's a branch of the civil service. It is government, so she worked for the government for a long time, which I think that a lot of Saturnian types and Capricorn types do find themselves falling into a role where they are doing a kind of government work, because government is kind of like the ruling structure kind of thing. Which, as I said, like Saturn and Capricorn are quite concerned with hierarchy. But actually, she ended up being forced out of that job. I mean, she left of her own accord, but she felt she had no option to stay. And she ended up working for the family business, and she is still working for the family business now. And she's done great things. She's put the family business online. They've got a website. Well, I think they had a website, but she's really done a lot to kind of make it a little bit like Uber. But she's always had that, I think, that expectation that, you know, I mean, she's always, you could see it as an opportunity that she could, if she wanted to, work for the family business. I don't suppose it was necessarily put on her, but I think that there was perhaps she had the expectation that she would like to take over the business when it was time for her parents to retire. There's an element of self expectation when it comes to Saturn rising. They expect a lot from themselves. They're perfectionists. They work hard. Some people really slouch when they walk around because they do feel like the weight of the world's on their shoulders. Life just doesn't feel easy for Saturn rising in many cases, and they are not shy of hard work. They usually have to be responsible from a very young age because the ascendant is an indicator for our first steps into the world. So early life for her would have probably been very work orientated. It may have been that the family business was always discussed around the table. And the particular cab firm that her family owns is a very reputable one. It's got a very good local reputation, and it also happens to have been sort of around for a long time. They've got some very big accounts. They have government accounts where, they do like collecting children with special needs and taking them to school and back, and things like that. So they've got like big government accounts where they're getting government funding for certain jobs, as well as doing local jobs and things like that. So they have got the, they do things by the book. They run criminal record check on people that come and work for them. They're a very reputable firm, have been around for a long time, and I can foresee that they'll probably be around for a lot longer. She's also got this Capricorn Moon, which happens to be trine that Saturn too. So she will have taken those lessons that she's learned, and she is going to be somebody who is naturally, conscientious, hardworking, and able to apply herself, and probably naturally slips into positions of responsibility, and isn't scared of taking that on. I happened to know her. I met her when she was a music promoter. She would run live music events, and I always thought, what I noticed about her, apart from her amazing cleavage, which she always had on display, which you might not necessarily think for a Virgo rising and Capricorn Moon, but maybe for a Scorpio Sun, which she does have. She had fantastic jugs and really gorgeous long dark hair, thick long dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and the thing that I loved the most about her was she had the driest sense of humour. Like so witty and so dry and so funny. Even when she filled out the form for this, and it said, I can't remember if it said, "How did you find me?" Yeah, on my form for the podcast. If you want to be on this podcast, you just sign up to my mailing list and complete the application form, which comes through. And if it doesn't come through for you, just send me an email and I'll pop it through for you. But yeah, Emily filled out the form, and it said, "How did you find me?" And she said, "Probably drunk out of our faces somewhere in a nightclub in Croydon at some point," which is totally true. We were both absolutely drunk as skunks, and having a great time. And Emily is somebody I've known for a long time, and she's a hardworking, respectable young lady. And a good laugh. And with Saturnian types, you've got Mercurial types who are usually quite witty, quite quick off the mark, and then you've got the Saturnian types, which are usually very dry sense of humour, very good with the comedy. Jim Carrey, I think, is he a Capricorn? I know he's got Venus in Capricorn on my sun, but he's got I'm pretty sure Jim Carrey has got that Saturnian humour. But anyway, I just thought I'd talk about Emily because, she's a good example of like the hard work that comes with Saturn. And over the past few years with that stellium that we've had in Capricorn, Emily's had that Saturn transit across her moon, and she's now a mum, and she's had a lot of responsibility thrust upon her. She's still working for the family business. She's paying for her child to have childcare, doing this pretty much out of her own pocket. She's so independent and so self-sufficient, to a fault, but she's doing a fantastic job. And Emily, if you're listening, lots of love to you. I hope you're good. We need to catch up at some point. So I thought that would be a good Saturn chart for us to look at, and a couple more that are celebrities. Well, they're very famous, and one that I think that you'll be very interested to hear. We have Margaret Thatcher. This is such a British episode. I'm sorry to anybody who was hoping for something a bit more international, but actually it's interesting because Saturn is a very British planet, I would say. It's very, if you think about the hierarchy, and we've got like the Commonwealth and all the the royal family and British politics. It's all this kind of hierarchy of rulership, and even the news that comes on in this country, the way that they all talk, very nasal and very no nonsense. It's very Saturnian. So Margaret Thatcher, Margaret Hilda Roberts was her birth name, 13th of August 1925, born at 9 a.m. in Grantham, England, Rodden rating A. So this means that we can trust her birth time. And she's got Sun in Libra, Moon in Leo, and her ascendant is in Scorpio, she has Saturn rising. And what was the nickname we had for Margaret Thatcher? The Iron Lady. Now, I'm not sure if you guys have been watching a TV show called The Crown on Netflix. I don't know if you can get it in the US or abroad, but The Crown is all about the British royal family. And at the moment, I can't remember what season I'm even in, but now Margaret Thatcher is in it. And she's being played by Gillian Anderson, who, by the way, is one of my favourites. I love Gillian Anderson, and I have since she was Scully in The X-Files. I'm such a hardcore Gillian Anderson fan. She is doing an incredible job of playing Margaret Thatcher. I don't know if anybody's seen Sex Education on Netflix, but she plays the hot mum who's a sex therapist in that. And she's so different in that compared to what she is in The Crown. Like, the fact she's such a chameleon. But anyway, we're not talking about Gillian Anderson. We're talking about Margaret Thatcher. But Margaret Thatcher, not only did she have that really fierce-looking mane of red hair, which you could kind of attribute to that moon in Leo, but that Saturn rising was that serious and focused, hard-working attitude she had. On the TV show The Crown, I don't know how accurate it is. I know that they're trying to be quite accurate with it. Margaret Thatcher talks about the fact that her and her father used to bond through working together, and that's what she does. It's kind of like her, what she does. It's just what she does. You know, it makes her happy to be working hard. She's a workaholic. Now, an interesting thing that Margaret Thatcher did in this country was, we used to all get milk back in I think it must have been in the 90s. Might have been in the 80s, actually. It would have been the 80s because she would have been in power. We would all get a carton of milk at our break time. And Margaret Thatcher stopped the milk. It was one of the Tory cutbacks. She's a Conservative, by the way. So that's the Saturnian political party. And yeah, she was one of the people that stopped one of the little things like giving children milk, giving them their little calcium fix on a daily basis, which is quite sad, really. But yeah, so that's the kind of milk being a symbol of the moon, that lunar nourishment, and that kind of motherly nectar that we associate milk with. And Margaret Thatcher, with her big Saturn fist, that Iron Lady, slamming down on the table and saying, "No milk for the children. We will not nourish these children. They can't have their free milk." So yeah, Margaret Thatcher has Saturn in Scorpio rising. Iron Lady is so fitting. Another thing that I think is quite interesting is that, I don't know how true this is either, but I read once upon a time that Margaret Thatcher used to eat 9 eggs a day. And can you imagine how constipated you'd be if you ate that many eggs every single day? Like, how bound up was that woman? Like, a sign, the sign of, like John Major, another Conservative, he looked quite constipated. But Margaret Thatcher must have been so constipated. And they say that the Queen also, whenever they have lots of royal visits where they have to go to lots of different places and they're outdoors for a lot of the day, they up the egg intake in her diet, so she has to go to the toilet less, which I think is interesting. That might be something that they do. These people that have to have demanding jobs with the public. They intentionally constipate themselves, these people in positions of power where they have a very Saturnian role. Just an interesting side note that, anyway, whether or not you find that interesting, I don't know. But also there's a scene in The Crown where the Queen and Margaret Thatcher, it's actually, I've just watched the episode recently where they have a public falling out, and the Queen actually voices her discrepancies with Margaret Thatcher, and allows it to go to print in one of the more sort of high-end newspapers in the UK. And her thoughts get out, and Margaret Thatcher is quite confrontational. And in their audience, they call it an audience, their meeting, Margaret Thatcher basically, she literally goes in and kind of bollocks the Queen in a very articulate way. And there's a bit where she says, you and I are the same age, and she says, I can't remember what she says something like, you and I are the same age. And the Queen says, oh, and who is the senior? And Margaret Thatcher says, I am. And it's just interesting to see the look on the Queen's face, because that's such a sort of loaded response. And it is interesting because the Queen, also somebody who's been, serving officially. I think she was, her coronation was at her Saturn Return. She's still the Queen of this country, and I don't even know how old she is now. She's got to be, is she in her 90s? 1936 she was, is that right? Oh, no, she was 10 in 1936. No, she was born in 1926. Okay, so I know my grandmother has just passed away. She was born in 1925, and she passed away at 95 years old. So the Queen is 94 to be 95 this year. Is that right? Am I wrong? Am I right? I don't know. 21st of April 1926, born at 2:40 a.m. The Rodden rating is a double A. So really can trust this birth time. She was born in Mayfair in London. And she has got Sun in Taurus, Moon in Leo, like Margaret Thatcher, and Ascendant Capricorn. But what's interesting about the Queen is she has got a Scorpio midheaven, and she has Saturn on her midheaven. So this is somebody who's had to bear the weight of Saturn throughout her life. I know a lot about this from watching The Crown, but her uncle abdicated, and then her father, King George, was then left to take the throne and become the King of the United Kingdom. And then he died when she was in her 20s, and she became the Queen, which I think happened around the age of 20. I can't remember how old she was now. She might have been 25 or 26, but they decided that they wanted to give her the coronation, crown her officially, under the advice of Winston Churchill, when she was having her Saturn return. Obviously, I don't think they planned it that way, but that's just how it went. I mean, I don't know if they didn't plan it that way, because I think that the royal family have had astrologers notoriously through the past, so we can't say that they didn't use an astrologer to coordinate these things, but they would never have gone public with that kind of information anyway. But anyway, so Saturn on the midheaven can be somebody who's always expected to live up to to step into somebody's shoes and to be very responsible, be held accountable. And the Queen has been through an awful lot since she's been on the throne. To be honest, she became the Queen at her Saturn return, and she's since had two Saturn returns while she's been in power. So that's somebody who's really endured a lot, and she's been quite traditional in some ways, but in some ways she's been relatively progressive. And now that Uranus has entered Taurus, and it will have transited her Sun, there's more change to come with things like Meghan Markle marrying into the royal family and Harry deciding to stop doing his royal duties. So really interesting to see how the royal family handles change when they are such an institution which is based on tradition, and that her right to rule as sovereign, her God-given right, as they say, becomes harder and harder to justify as the time goes by. So they have to be adaptable, and they do have to progress and, accept that there are ways that they could change and be less exclusive, more inclusive, more human, I think. And if you haven't watched The Crown, I definitely think you should watch it. It's just fascinating. It's so interesting. I'm so glued to it. And, it just gives you a whole different idea of the royal family and what they do. It's a really, really great show, and just so fantastic that you get to watch this whole chunk of Margaret Thatcher and the Queen and their challenges with one another. And because them both having a moon in Leo as well, the moon is an emotional response which can be triggered through the presence of another person. If you've got the moon in the same sign as another person, you can have a sense of understanding, but you can also have a sense of emotional trigger with them as well. So anyway, I've waffled enough. I hope you found it interesting. It's been a really interesting show to record for you. And if you've been enjoying what I'm doing, take your phone out your pocket, go on to Apple Podcasts and just write me a little review, give me some stars, and other people can find me through that method and trust me and what I have to say. And I've also got my Patreon page set up, which I'll have a link for you in the description. And by the way, I'm so sorry, I know some of you are looking for charts for shows. I really have to get on to that and get that sorted. I'm going to do my best to get that sorted as soon as possible. And you can help me out by looking and telling me if I've missed little bits of information that need to be on there. So I'm going to just get anything up as brief as I can at the moment, just so you've got access to the resources. And, if you spot anything that I've missed, just let me know. But yeah, check out my Patreon page. And next week we're going to be starting on the transpersonal planets, and that is Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. So I look forward to recording those for you, and I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing them too. And I'll speak to you next time when we talk about unpredictable Uranus. Take care, everyone. I'll speak to you next time. Bye.